I've always had a soft spot for Liverpool, which is a bit strange because I had never been there until recently. My attachment to the city goes way back to my childhood. When I was a kid, I was obsessive about English soccer and followed Liverpool religiously, but I never went to see them play and never actually set foot in the city. Now this finally changed this year when I was asked to record a live show at the Liverpool Irish Festival, which took place in October. As I prepared for that show, I realised my perceptions of Liverpool would be changed. The city has a long and complex history. Even a few minutes of research brings up its deep roots in slavery. So for that live show, I wanted to interview someone that could help explain this and the wider complex history of Liverpool. It was Emma, the director of the Liverpool Irish Festival, who first put me in contact with Teresa Hill, whose interview you're about to hear. Teresa is passionate about her family history, and in many ways it encapsulates so much of Liverpool's history in the later 20th century. Now, our conversation proved to be extremely difficult to edit down into a podcast. Teresa and myself spoke for about an hour, and every second was fascinating. Her mother's family were from Ireland, while her father was from Freetown in Sierra Leone. You're about to hear Teresa speak candidly about growing up black and Irish in Liverpool, how her Irish grandfather, Luke Bernard, encouraged her to have pride in both her African and Irish ancestry at a time when many mixed-race children were ostracised by Irish families in Liverpool. We also talked about wider Liverpool history and her family's experience of working in the harsh world of the Liverpool docks. We also looked at how the Troubles influenced her life. But what surprised me most, though, was how religion was so central to Irish identity in Liverpool in the later 20th century, and how frequently sectarian tensions in the city could spill over into violence around the 12th of July. Stay tuned, because this is a really fascinating story and interview. Hello and welcome to the Irish History Podcast. My name is Finn Dwyer. Now, as I mentioned last week, I've paused my ongoing War of Independence series until January, when the final 4 episodes are due to be released. I've some really great shows coming for you between now and Christmas, including this one. Next week is the usual monthly break, but there will be an exclusive show on Patreon and Acast Plus that's based around research I had initially done for the last episode in the War of Independence series that didn't make the cut. I found a great story of an English coal exporter that got caught up in the War of Independence in New York, but it eventually got edited out as the episode went in a different direction. Now that will be its own episode, available next week on patreon.com/Irish podcast and Acast Plus. You can find links in the show notes below. Also, don't forget, the Irish History Summit is coming soon in January 2022. We have an early bird offer that runs out at the end of November, so if you want to get tickets, check it out now. It's at irishhistorysummit.eventbrite.ie. And finally, the shop. We have a new range of pewter gifts in stock at the moment. You can get pewter pocket watches, keyrings and hip flasks of Constance Markievicz and Grace O'Malley. They're really unique gifts and something that people will have for years to come. Check them out at irishhistorypodcast.ie/shop. That's irishhistorypodcast.ie/shop. Now to the interview. I just want to thank Shirley, who drove over, Emma and everyone at the Liverpool Irish Festival who organised the event, the staff at Grand Central where the show took place, and the Arts Council of England who supported the festival. And most importantly, I want to thank Teresa herself. Sound on the show is by Jason Looney. So first of all, Teresa, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's a great honour to have you on. And maybe actually I'll ask you to explain, you've done a lot of research into your family tree, and maybe explain for people here and listening at home your family's history.
Right, well, my family's history is part West African, Freetown, Sierra Leone, and then part Irish, which I found out Leinster is where I'm genetically linked. Growing up, we were brought up very closely with my nan and granddad. My granddad, Luke Bernard, was a large figure in my life, and in all our lives, all my sisters and brothers. He taught us about the histories of Ireland. I knew about the Irish famine. I knew about the Green Hills. I knew all the songs by the time I was about 5. He also taught us about Africa. He also made me and my sister Angela totally aware that we came from Africa and we came from Ireland, and that made us. So we knew that completely. My great-grandparents were kept alive, even though I never met them, but they were kept alive by my granddad and my nana. So our daddy, our mummy, they were my great-grandparents on one side, Bridget McMahon on the other side, with John Bernard. So I knew all of them. I even knew my great-greats from the Isle of Man. Charlotte Louise Clucas was my great-great-grandmother. The Isle of Lise Clucas, they've actually called Lacey Street after that man, because he was the first turnkey in the Isle of Man. So I do know about my greats on that level.
And your family left Ireland around 1840, you were saying?
The first Luke Bernard left Ireland in 1840. He arrived in Liverpool. He didn't stay in Liverpool. He went to the Isle of Man. I don't know why, but he went to the Isle of Man. He married Charlotte Louise. He was born in the Isle of Man and of Irish descent. And they came back to Liverpool and reared their family in Liverpool then, and died in Liverpool, actually. So they never went back to Ireland, as far as I knew.
And then, I suppose, moving back, then you talked about your grandfather, and he would have encouraged the history of both sides of your family, but your father and your mother's family. Do you want to talk a little bit more, because we met last night and we were chatting about it, and your grandfather really comes out as a really powerful man.
Luke Bernard was a very powerful man. He came from a powerful family. As far as I'm concerned, he was a very forward-thinking man. And when I look back now, I think that when he was looking at his little grandchildren, because we were the first grandchildren of Luke Bernard and Emma Harris, when he was looking at us, he knew that he needed to protect us. So I think that's why he gave us a strong foundation, which my mum carried on and my aunties carried on. So he wanted us to know the history of our family and wanted us to be in no uncertain terms. No matter what we were called on the outside, we actually knew who we were. We knew who my granddad was, and I knew who my nana was. We weren't ostracised. Mixed race children in my day growing up didn't know the grandparents, because the mum had married an African or a West Indian man, and the family didn't want to know. Okay. But there was also families whose family did want to know, who used to come and take their grandchildren back to Ireland for the 6-week holiday. My family, through my granddad, even up until a couple of weeks ago, I'm at a thing with all the Bernards. It was a new baby had been born, a little Reva. I'm just giving her a shout out. And we were there with all my family on the Bernard side. My mum passed away a couple of weeks ago, and both sides came, which was quite funny, because we had one side in one room and the other side in the other room over some conflict of well before I was born to do with my nana and granddad. So, but we all were together, and a couple of weeks I'll be going again with another cousin. So our link is quite strong as a family, but that's my family. I'm under no illusion, and I know for a fact it didn't happen for every family.
It really strikes at you, just through everything you've spoken about, that your grandfather was quite, as you say, forward.
Luke Bernard, don't forget that name. I love my granddad. He was a beautiful man. My nana was a hawker, a hard-working woman, barra woman. Her name was Emma Harris. And she was off the Whites, or the Harrises. And then I've got the Bernards on the Bernards. Both strong families who both loved us and brought us up very confident, knowing exactly who we are, regardless of what anybody else in the world thinks. We know who we are, and that's what counts. And we still do. We follow that on. My son is called Luke after my granddad. My son's 3 children are called Luke John, Sinead, Siobhan Bridget. We've kept still the Irish in because of the respect for my grandfather, who I absolutely adored. Me and Angela and my brothers and sisters love my granddad. We love me and Anna as well, but my granddad was the stronger figure within the household. All the family used to come. So cousins and aunties had come to my nana and granddad's houses. So obviously we still have that link today. I still link with my cousins, and on both sides, on the Harris side, which is my nana's side, and on the Bernard side. So that link, what my granddad wanted, is still carried on.
And then you were talking last night about, I suppose, to one degree or another, like him taking that stance and encouraging you to have, to be proud of both sides, both the Irish and then the African side of your families. That would have potentially been, I suppose, a controversial thing for him. You were talking about when he would have been in the world of work and things like that. Yeah. Could you tell us a bit about, I suppose, Liverpool at that time, that it would have been, I suppose racism was a...
Oh yeah, it was racist. Liverpool's a racist city. It always has been. So yeah, it was even stronger racist then. Obviously, jobs, things like that. I mean, my dad, African, he was a merchant seaman because he wouldn't have been able to get a job on shore anyway. Okay. Just like when the Irish first came. And so it was a very racist city, but my granddad protected us. And people, maybe because of that family being a strong family, that we were closeted. Yep. So we were never aware of any problems until we got older, obviously, and started going out and mixing ourselves and going to school.
And then in the Irish community, I suppose there's a stereotype of Irish communities abroad of being white. How did you find, when you would have socialized in Irish events, things like that, how did you find, was the Irish community welcoming, or how did you find it?
Yeah, we were never worried. And even during 1972 and the uprising of 81, we had Irish white families who were brought up in our community who fought with us.
Can you explain a bit about the uprising of 1981?
Well, 81 uprising, I had my son by then, Luke, he was 2. So for me, it was a very, very frightening time.
What happened? Or I suppose people at home...
It was over the police. It was, okay. We were fighting the police because it was just constant aggression from the police, constantly verbal abuse, and our young boys, you were terrified to let them out. And what sparked it was there was one arrest made, and that's what sparked it. But when we say that sparked it, that was just the spark on top of an already bonfire that was already there. We weren't allowed to move. We weren't allowed to move out the area. We couldn't get jobs. It was in every grain of society that we were fighting because of the colour of our skin. And at that point in time, it didn't matter whether we were off-white or we weren't. It was the fact that we were black and we're going to attack you, and that's the way it was.
And then, I suppose, that something running parallel, and this really surprised me, was you were talking about last night about sectarianism and how sectarian tensions in Liverpool, I suppose what would have, after the famine, with the huge influx of Irish Catholics, there's a lot written and it's, I suppose, well known about the violent sectarianism. But you were saying when you were growing up that like sectarianism that could spill over into violence, and I suppose people listening at home might be familiar with violence around the 12th of July marches in Belfast, which still continue. But you can...
We did have little skirmishes here because of the Orange Lodge. On the 12th of July, they would march. Now, I went to St. Anne's School, which is on Overbury Street, and they would march past our school. They would march past the block, so we would throw stones and things, because we were brought up that they were our enemy.
Okay.
Like the cathedral, like for me, more the Irish was more like on a religious level.
Okay.
So we weren't allowed to go in a Protestant church. I never went in the Anglican cathedral until I was a big woman. And as I was walking in there, I had to say, sorry, Grandad, because... And then when I got in, I got the shock of my life because it's high church. So they even do a Latin mass in that church. But I didn't know nothing about it because we weren't allowed.
And would that have been a common experience, do you think, in Liverpool at the time, like for Irish Catholics in Liverpool?
In our communities, there was mainly of Irish Catholic. So in the gardens, in the tenements, like Windsor Gardens, Myrtle House, they were like off Irish Catholic. We all went to St. Anne's School. So we mixed like that. During the Troubles in Ireland, we were very much on the side of the IRA. I can't speak for other black people, but we in particular, and in my family, we were very much on the side of the Irish Catholics. I mean, as a child, we grew up with my mum on a Sunday when she'd cooked all the Sunday dinner. She'd put the music on, and the first song was the Irish Rebel song, and that was an LP. And then after that, she'd put on the African freedom fighter songs. So we knew about Africa getting their freedom in April 61 and things like that. And then after that, we could have ours on, like Michael Jackson, the Jackson 5 or whatever. Now, the Irish Rebel songs, we did used to cry because they were a story. And the likes of Kevin Barry, we'd sob when he was saying, do not hang me like a dog, shoot me like a soldier. And we'd be crying. And because we were little kids and we were listening to the story of the songs. So that's the way we grew up until we were about 14, 15, basically.
And then I suppose the outbreak of the Troubles in Ireland after 1968 in particular, that was a very difficult time for Irish communities across England in particular, also Scotland and Wales. And I've talked to friends of mine who grew up in Birmingham. They really had a very, very difficult time. But what was the experience in Liverpool for the Irish community at that point?
People were against the Irish Catholic community. Because obviously we were getting, the propaganda we were getting told was it was the IRA. They were bombing everything and they were bombing us on the mainland. So obviously people were aggressive towards them. But we were also having our own fight as black people as well, because in 72, there was a riot that people don't remember in Liverpool, or because we got houses on a housing estate, which I lived in Windsor Gardens. All the people from Windsor Gardens came and attacked the housing estate. We got no help from the police, and we had to get boys from our area to come and protect us in our houses. So we were having like a double trouble, if you know what I mean, because we were still fighting our own fight as well.
Of course, yeah. And did you get any support in, like, obviously you've kind of got the I think you call it dual heritage, and that, you would have a foot in both, like you would have seen it from both perspectives. Did you ever get like solidarity from an Irish community that was also feeling like, I suppose just it struck me there when you talked about housing, that was one of the things that really sparked the troubles in the north, was issues around housing.
Not on like a mass level, but we had Irish families, pure white families within Toxteth who were with us, who were still with us to this day actually, who fought with us, who married into us. So and also being of mixed race, there was families who had pure white sisters or brothers, as well as being mixed race. So we did have that mix, but I wouldn't say we were aware of the full Irish community, like all the Beetleheads or what have you coming down and helping us. But within Toxteth, the white people and the Irish who were there fought with us.
And then maybe moving back a few generations in your family, you talked about how Luke Bernard, I think, and his father, and maybe his father before him, all worked on the docks.
Yeah.
And that would have been, sorry, go ahead.
They were all dockers labourers. And my great-great-grandfather, John Bernard, he actually was killed on the Liverpool dock. He was suffocated by coal. He was in the hole trying to get the coal, and the wrench snapped and killed him. He was only 31 and left my great-grandmother with 5 children, Bridget McMahon. One child, Hugh McMahon, Hugh Bernard, was the baby. He was only 6 weeks old at the time. I don't know whether they got any help or anything from even the church or anything, I don't know. But she was left on her own with them children.
And then that would have been a common enough Irish experience, I guess, but the docks don't really exist in the same way as they, like in all big port cities, in Dublin the same. Everything's been mechanised. Do you remember, like, was there still a big employment for Irish people on the docks, like back in the, like, when did that change? Or like
the stories I was told that the Irish had to fight to get on the dock, to get the jobs on the docks. That was the stories I got told when I was little. Also, the Irish descent used to fight in Liverpool here. London Road was apparently the place at the time. So they actually used to fight big men fighting each other. So whether that was over jobs, I wasn't born at that time, but that's all I remember. My Auntie Susie, her dad got his eye taken out. It was very violent. My granddad apparently he attacked somebody in a toilet or something. It seemed to me it was quite violent.
So it's like people are being hired on a daily basis.
Because the Liverpool people must have wanted jobs, and we used to having a closed shop, and then the Irish all came, and they wanted jobs as well.
And kind of the way you're talking about it there is quite interesting in that, like, your mum, like, it had been generations of her family since there had been someone who had lived in Ireland, but it was very much alive in just the stories you talk about her. Like, she's almost like she was born in Dublin, or so, like that she has that, like, that community we're able to keep alive. That
I do think that what happens when people do move away from a community, they try to keep your culture, you're keeping your culture strong. And I do think that's what was happening. Our culture was kept strong. My mum was Bridget Bernadette Bernard, actually. And my great-grandmother, Bridget McMahon, when I was looking for her through the records, I think every child in the dingle was named Bridget because of the amount of people. then they made the churches, because the amount of Irish that came in, they could pay for churches. Like St. Patrick's was the first church to come here. Other than that, they were like chapels, little chapels. So I do think that religion kept the culture very strong.
And then, say, events like St. Patrick's Day, I'm not particularly familiar, but I'm guessing it's a big enough event today. Was it like that in the 70s? Or like, I'm just wondering, you know, where tensions could be more fraught?
When I was a child, it was very staunch. Like, we had our shamrocks, and you'd have your green ribbon in for school. I used to eat my shamrock, by the way. I was a fat child. I was always hungry. So I'd be eating my shamrock. But yeah, we'd have our big shamrock. We knew it was St. Paddy's Day. We had to go to church. Also, another thing was my family in particular. We weren't allowed to celebrate bonfire night, which as a child was horrific for us. Because as far as my family were concerned, Guy Fawkes was a hero. So we weren't allowed to burn him. But so we used to have to sneak and make the guy and hide it and like come out and play and like, you know, do penny for the guy. But we weren't allowed. We weren't allowed to look at the Orange Lodge neither. We had to turn our backs if we were in the street.
And could I ask you a bit actually about that? Because I was very surprised myself. Like, I had heard about sectarian tensions in Liverpool, as I said, up until, like, say, the Second World War. But I wasn't aware that, like, that kind of would have continued. And I suppose you've got that, like, echo of tensions from Ireland that I think people are very familiar with them in Glasgow. But you were talking about quite contentious marches around the 12th here in Liverpool.
Yeah, when the 12th of July used to march, then all the Catholics, kids, we would collect stones and throw stones and at them and things like that. I mean, it was very separate for religion. And when our cathedral got built, which they call Paddy's Wigwam, but when our cathedral got built, the bishop from our cathedral, the Catholic cathedral, and from the Protestant cathedral, or the Christian cathedral, whatever they call it, they both came together on Hope Street and shook hands and to try and quell, and it did.
Okay.
Then people became more sort of Christian. It wasn't so big as it used to be when I was younger. As I was growing up more as a woman, then it sort of seemed to die out.
And then I suppose something that I was very interested in, like I talked earlier about, I suppose, one of the connections that explains a lot of the Irish history in Liverpool is the history of the British Empire. But you talked about I suppose, like from your like African heritage, the legacy of slavery in the city is something that you would feel or see today.
Yeah, you still see the product of slavery throughout the world. There's still institutionalised racism. It's as strong as ever. Even though within your normal walk of life, you don't see it because normal people speak to you on a normal level and deal with you on a normal level. But it is in every sector of society. So when people say 1,000 years a slave, it's still today, because in all the countries of Europe, in all the countries of the world, there is still strong racism.
Yeah. No, that really struck me. Even like you see it, as I said, in Ireland as well. It's developing, and it's you see the growth of racism certainly in the last 25 years, or maybe it's becoming more apparent as Ireland becomes a more multicultural society. Then there's something else I wanted to ask you about. You touched on it earlier, just maybe around music and culture. I suppose you had access to two quite different cultural / musical like traditions when you were growing up. Would you have gone to both? Like, I'm just wondering, would you have gone to, I don't know if there was Cayley's or Irish dances or like whoever was playing here the Dubliners or whatever, or would you have gone to more like? Was that a contested aspect of like your dual heritage?
When I was about between the ages of 7 and 10, I used to learn Irish dancing.
Okay.
I used to learn tap dancing as well. So we used to go for tap dancing from one side and the Irish dancing from another side. So I used to know about things like that. But as I became a teenager, I was more for black music and black things, and I was more for that. But if there was an Irish dance or something going on, then we'd always go because you're always going to have a laugh. And the Irish have always been great with me. I've never had a problem.
Okay.
So we always know if you're Irish, step into the parlour, so to speak. And that's the way we looked at things. So I wouldn't feel inhibited going into the Irish place. I would think I'd feel more inhibited, which is weird, but going into somewhere where it's pure English.
Okay.
Because obviously of the love of my grandparents. So I would feel more, where white people are concerned, I feel more akin with Irish. Obviously, I'm black, so I'm akin with my African side, but I do feel more akin with Irish rather than English.
A lot of Irish people in the US now are talking about the Irish diaspora actually starting to die a bit in the US, because the last big generation to go to the US was in the 1980s. So, and, there's just over time, the direct connections, that I suppose would have sustained the kind of constant movement back, say, between New York and Boston and Ireland, just isn't there anymore. I suppose if you wanted to give the health of the Irish community in Liverpool, is that history of, since we kind of touched on there, over the last 180 years, back and forth, is that still continue, or can you see it in the city today?
No, I don't see it as strong today, not in Toxteth anyway. I think more the Irish community are more like Kirkdale, Kirby, even a lot of Irish descent are in Kirby now. So because of the housing thing here, everything got smashed down, and that, I wouldn't say there was very strong Irish in Toxteth Park as there used to be from the 1800s right the way through. I think now, as I say, it's more Kirkdale, more Kirby, that end. But we do have Irish families in our community who, like I said, have always been there and are still there now.
And then something that kind of interests me a lot, and I suppose we're verging onto the contemporary, but I often wonder we're living through huge changes with the internet, social media, things like that. You've talked a lot about like various different, what strikes me is you're talking about very intense community links and bonds between a community. And people talk a lot about those breaking down, like through, people are always on their phones, they don't necessarily go to community events. Like, do you see that in, like, you've grown up in Toxteth all your life, like, do you see that has that community changed, or does it still have those close bonds, like you talked there about, like, earlier on?
No, it has changed, because since the riots, the city council then started to actually move people out of Toxteth. So a lot of people did leave the area, and then the community started to change. So as a community, we're not as tight as we were, but we are trying to get that back now. We're trying to get our Caribbean Centre back up and to try and build them links back again. Because and obviously now as well, a lot of people are on social media. So the ones who aren't sort of get left out, if you know what I mean. So you don't hear that much unless you're on social media of things that are going on. But the community is becoming strong. We've got the youth Now, you are coming up and continuing with them links.
Teresa, thanks very much. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Again, we'll ask the audience if anyone has a question. We have two here, so.
To finish, I just want to say thanks to Teresa for sharing her story. It was really fascinating to meet her and talk about her life. Don't forget, next week's episode is coming up on Acast Plus and Patreon. You can find links in the show notes below. Until next time, Slán.